Let history speak. In the heart of the ancient world, a young man stood on the cusp of greatness. Alexander, the son of Philip II of Macedon, was about to embark on a journey that would reshape the known world. At just 20 years old, he inherited a kingdom and an army, but his ambitions reached far beyond the borders of Macedon. Little did he know, his eastern conquest would become one of the most legendary campaigns in history. The ascent to greatness. Alexander's story begins in the shadow of his father, Philip II. Philip was a military genius who had transformed Macedon from a small fragmented kingdom into a powerful force in Greece. He had created a professional army, introduced innovative military tactics, and expanded Macedon's influence through a series of strategic alliances and conquests. But Philip's reign was cut short when he was assassinated in 336 BC. Alexander, who had been groomed for leadership since childhood, was thrust into the spotlight. He quickly consolidated his power, eliminating any potential rivals and asserting his authority over the Macedonian army. With the support of his loyal generals and soldiers, he set his sights on the Persian Empire, the most powerful and wealthy kingdom in the world at the time. The Persian Empire was a vast and diverse realm that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River. It was ruled by Darius III, a king who was known for his wealth and luxury, but also for his indecisiveness and weakness. Alexander saw an opportunity to challenge the Persians and prove his worth as a leader. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, with an army of about 35,000 men. This was a bold and audacious move, as the Persians had a much larger and more experienced army. But Alexander was confident in his abilities and the loyalty of his troops. The first major battle of the campaign took place at the Granicus River in modern-day Turkey. The Persians had positioned their army on the opposite side of the river, hoping to use the natural barrier to their advantage. But Alexander was not deterred. He led his troops across the river in a daring charge, overwhelming the Persian defenses and routing their army. This victory was a significant morale boost for the Macedonians, and a clear sign that Alexander was a force to be reckoned with. Over the next few years, Alexander continued his eastward conquest, winning a series of battles against the Persians. At the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, he faced Darius III himself. The Persians had a much larger army, but Alexander's superior tactics and leadership allowed him to outmaneuver them and achieve a decisive victory. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family and his treasure. Alexander's victory at Issus was a turning point in the campaign. It gave him control of the eastern Mediterranean and opened the door to the heart of the Persian Empire. He continued his march eastward, capturing the cities of Tyre and Gaza, and then moving into Egypt. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians had been under Persian rule for centuries and were eager to be free. Alexander established a new city, Alexandria, which would become one of the most important cultural and economic centers of the ancient world. He also visited the Oracle of Siwa, where he was declared the son of Zeus-Ammon, a divine title that further enhanced his status and authority. After leaving Egypt, Alexander returned to the Persian Empire and continued his conquest. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, he faced Darius III for the second time. This time, the Persians had a massive army, estimated to be around 250,000 men. But Alexander was not intimidated. He used his superior cavalry and infantry to outflank the Persians and break their lines. Darius fled the battlefield once again, and this time he was assassinated by his own officers. With Darius dead, Alexander was now the undisputed master of the Persian Empire. He captured the Persian capital of Persepolis and looted its treasures, which were said to be the most valuable in the world. He also burned down the city as an act of revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece in the 5th century BC. But Alexander's conquest was not without its challenges. As he moved deeper into the eastern part of the empire, he faced resistance from local tribes and kingdoms. He also had to deal with the harsh terrain and climate, which made it difficult to supply and maintain his army. Despite these challenges, Alexander remained determined to continue his conquest and reach the ends of the earth. One of the most significant challenges Alexander faced was in India. In 326 BC, he crossed the Indus River and entered the Punjab region. Here, he faced a powerful army led by Porus, a local king. The Battle of the Hydaspes River was one of the most brutal and hard-fought battles of Alexander's campaign. The Indians had a large number of war elephants, which were a fearsome weapon on the battlefield. But Alexander was able to use his cavalry and infantry to outmaneuver the elephants and defeat Porus's army. After the battle, Alexander was impressed by Porus's courage and leadership. He allowed Porus to retain his kingdom and even made him an ally. This act of mercy and diplomacy was typical of Alexander's approach to conquest. He believed in winning the hearts and minds of the people he conquered, not just subjugating them by force. But Alexander's army was growing tired and homesick. After years of campaigning, they were eager to return to Macedon. When Alexander announced his plans to continue his conquest and cross the Ganges River, his soldiers mutinied. They refused to go any further, and Alexander was forced to turn back. In 325 BC, Alexander and his army began their long journey back to Macedon. Along the way, they faced many challenges, including harsh weather, disease, and attacks from local tribes. But Alexander remained determined to get his army home safely. Finally, in 324 BC, they reached the city of Susa, where they were reunited with their families and friends. Alexander's eastern conquest had been a remarkable achievement. In just 13 years, he had conquered an empire that stretched from Greece to India, covering an area of over 2 million square miles. He had spread Greek culture and ideas throughout the region, creating a new era of cultural exchange and synthesis, known as the Hellenistic period. He had also established a network of cities and colonies that would serve as centers of trade, learning, and innovation for centuries to come. But Alexander's conquest had also come at a great cost. Thousands of people had died in the battles, and many more had been displaced from their homes. The destruction and looting of cities and temples had also had a profound impact on the cultural and economic life of the region. And despite his many achievements, Alexander was still a young man, and his future was uncertain. The stage was set for the next act of Alexander's story, as he faced the challenges of ruling an empire and dealing with the aftermath of his conquest. The legacy and the aftermath. After his return to Susa, Alexander faced the daunting task of ruling an empire that was vast and diverse. He had to deal with the different cultures, languages, and religions of the people he had conquered, as well as the political and economic challenges of integrating them into a single state. One of the first things Alexander did was to try to bridge the gap between the Greeks and the Persians. He encouraged intermarriage between the two groups, and he even married a Persian princess, Roxana. He also adopted many Persian customs and traditions, such as wearing Persian clothing and using Persian court etiquette. This was a controversial move, as many of his Greek soldiers and officers saw it as a betrayal of their culture and heritage. Alexander also tried to create a new capital city for his empire. He chose the city of Babylon, which was located in the heart of the Persian Empire. He planned to build a massive palace and a temple to Zeus Ammon in the city, as well as a library and a museum. But these plans were never fully realized, as Alexander died before they could be completed. In 323 BC, while in Babylon, Alexander fell ill. The exact cause of his illness is unknown, but some historians believe it was malaria or typhoid fever. Others believe he may have been poisoned by his enemies. Whatever the cause, Alexander's health rapidly deteriorated, and he died at the age of 32. The news of Alexander's death sent shockwaves throughout the empire. His generals and officers were left to deal with the power vacuum that had been created. There was no clear successor to Alexander, and a struggle for power ensued. The empire was divided into several kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's generals. These kingdoms became known as the Hellenistic kingdoms, and they would go on to play a significant role in the history of the ancient world. The most powerful of these kingdoms were the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid kingdom in the Middle East, and the Antigonid kingdom in Macedon. The Hellenistic period that followed Alexander's death was a time of great cultural and intellectual achievement. Greek culture and ideas continued to spread throughout the region, and there was a flourishing of art, literature, science, and philosophy. The cities that Alexander had founded, such as Alexandria and Antioch, became centers of learning and innovation, attracting scholars and artists from all over the world. But the Hellenistic period was also a time of political instability and conflict. The Hellenistic kingdoms were constantly at war with each other, as they vied for control of territory and resources. There were also frequent revolts and uprisings by the local populations, who resented the rule of the Greek conquerors. Over time, the Hellenistic kingdoms began to decline. They were weakened by internal strife, economic problems, and the rise of new powers, such as the Roman Republic. In the 2nd century BC, the Roman Republic began to expand its influence into the Eastern Mediterranean, and it gradually absorbed the Hellenistic kingdoms one by one. By the 1st century BC, the Hellenistic period had come to an end. The Roman Empire had become the dominant power in the Mediterranean world, and the legacy of Alexander's Eastern conquest was gradually fading into history. But Alexander's legacy would continue to inspire and influence people for centuries to come. His military conquests, his leadership skills, and his vision of a united world would become the stuff of legend. He would be remembered as one of the greatest military commanders and leaders in history. A man who had dared to dream the impossible and had come close to achieving it. In conclusion, Alexander's Eastern conquest was a remarkable chapter in the history of the ancient world. It was a story of ambition, courage, and determination, as well as a story of cultural exchange and synthesis. Alexander's legacy would continue to shape the world for centuries to come, and his name would become synonymous with greatness and adventure. If you like this story, please follow, like, and share it.